Hello class, in this segment we're going to take a look at some practice problems for chapter 14. So let's get started. So the first problem that we're going to take a look at is here on, what page is this on? 594 in our textbooks, 594, and we're looking at problem P, oops, problem 6 or P6. All right, so we have some information about a bond that was issued out by Cozumel Corporation. They're $10 million bonds. They have a 10.5% interest rate, stated interest rate. The bonds mature in 20 years with interest payments date semi-annually because it's showing twice a year, May 31st and November 30. After 10 years, the bonds are called at $104. 104. Now, I did not mean to say dollars at 104. That's actually a percentage. That's 104%. Bonds prices don't show the percent, they just show it as a percentage of. So it'll say 98, that's 98%. If it says 104, that's 104%. So that's what that is. And each $1,000 bond is convertible into 25 shares of $20 par value common stock. So here we're using straight line method. We're not using the effective interest rate. We're using a straight line method to make our calculations very, very simple. All right, so the first thing that we have to determine, excuse me, how much cash did we receive? So let's go up here. Cash received from the sale of this bond. Well, we're going to take the value of the bond and we're going to multiply it, this is after it's been sold, by the percentage, 103%. So we multiply that out, that's going to be $10,300,000. Okay. So B asks us what is the amount of bonds payable? Well, they give us that, don't they? They told us it's $10 million. All right. C. What's the difference between these two? Well, 10,300,000 minus 10 million gives us 300,000. And this value is what we call our bond premium. The amount that bond holders are willing to pay extra. They're willing to pay $300,000 extra for this particular bond because it's paying at 103%, which is more than 100%. So it's a beautiful thing, right? So we go to D, and what they want us to do is to D1 calculate the cash paid in interest. All right, so we take the amount of the bond, which is 100,000, times, and they gave us this amount. It's 100 and, let's see, hold on. Let's see, where's the 105 come from? How much cash is paid in interest? I think I have a typo in my calculations here. Let me get my calculator and let me check this really quick. All right, so we multiply that by the 10.5% that was listed up here for the stated interest rate of the bond. So 10.5% times 6 over 12, or you could have just multiplied by 2, but 6 over 12. So that's 6 months over 12 months. And the reason why we have to do that is because we pay the interest twice a year. So every 6 months. Some would say we just multiply it by 2. It ends up being the the same thing, but or divide by 2. Well, however you want to do that. But anyway, so let's go on in, and this is what we come up with. 525,000. All right. So then number 2, we need to calculate the amortization. And another word for amortization is a spreading out the bond premium. So that's another word for amortization. So remember, the bond premium is 300,000, and we know that from this area here. And we multiply, we divide that by the length of the bond, which is 20 years times 2. Again, twice it's being paid twice. It's accounted for twice a year. So that's 7,500. So the next one here is when we want to talk about our interest expense based on all of this. We take the cash paid in interest So we go in to calculate our interest expense. We're going to take this and this. So we take the interest that we paid and we're going to subtract out the semi-annual interest payment, or the premium, I should say, the premium amount that we just calculated. And so that gives us 517,500. So we're going to apply the same calculations, but we're going to change up the scenario. This time, instead of the bond being called at 103% like we did in this one, and the next one we're going to calculate the impact of when the bond is sold at 97%. So in this next one, A, cash received, and that's going to be 10 million times the 97%, and that's going to give us 9,700,000. So the next thing that we want to calculate is B, the bonds payable. And they gave us that. That's the 10 million. That's the stated value of the bond. Then C, we want to determine the difference between the two. So that's the 10 million minus the 9,700,000, and that gives us 300,000. All right, and that's considered our bond discount. And it's a discount because the bond was sold for less than its stated value. It was sold at 9.7 million, not 10 million. All right. So the next one that we want to do is we want to calculate the cash paid in interest. So the cash paid in interest is the $10 million stated bond value times the 10.5%, which is the stated interest rate for the bond, at 6 months over 12 months. And so that gives us 525,000. So then number two, we want to amortize or spread out that payment over the life of the bond. Remember, the life of the bond is 20 years. So 300,000, and that's what we're talking about, the amortization of the bond discount, divided by the 20 years, and the payments will be paid twice a year. And so that's $7,500 every 6 months for the next 20 years. So then we calculate the interest expense, and that's going to be the 525,000 plus the 7,500, and that gives us 532,500. So in the next portion of this exercise, we want to determine the cash that is necessary in order to retire the bond. So now we're talking about bond retirement. So we take the call amount, again, that's given here at 104%. So the stated value of the bond times 104%, and that gives us 10,400,000. So this is the amount to retire bonds. Okie dokie. So then we have to determine, well, if this is the amount to retire the bonds, did we have a gain or a loss on retiring these bonds early? So remember, to determine this that was A, B. So to calculate that, we take the bond stated value, and what we're going to do is we're going to take the 300,000 and subtract out the 150,000. And remember, this is coming from, since the call takes place after 10 years of a 20-year period, 50% or $150,000 of the $300,000 premium has been amortized. So that's where that comes from. And so when we do that, we end up getting 10,150,000. And oopsie. So when we take that 10,400,000 and we subtract out the 10,150,000, we see that we have a $250,000 loss. All right. All right. Then when we come and we take a look at the questions here in 4, it says assume the price in requirement 2 and that the bonds are converted to common stock 10 years later. So instead of us purchasing them back, they convert to a whole different type of into a different type of, and they convert over into an equity. So turn from a liability to an equity, which is the stock. So what do we do here? So A asks us, is there a gain or loss on the conversion? If so, how much? So there is no gain and there's no loss when you have a bond conversion. Why? Because the issued stock is recorded at the carrying value of the bonds that are converted. So then we go to B and it says how many shares of common stock are issued in exchange for these bonds. And so here the calculation is we take the $10,000 bonds, sorry, and we multiply them by $25 share per share, and that ends up being 250,000 shares of common stock. All right. So then C asks us in dollar amounts, how does this transaction affect the total liabilities and the stockholders' equity of the company? And so what we can calculate here is that bonds payable and its unamortized discount will be reduced in the liabilities section of the accounting equation. Common stock and additional paid in capital will be increased in stockholders' equity. So, in other words, liabilities will decrease, equity will increase because the bonds are no longer bonds, they're now common stock. So, um, we see the decrease in liabilities because the bonds payable was 10 million, and then we subtract out the 150,000, and that comes from, remember, the 300,000 at 50%. So then we subtract that we get 9.85 billion, or 9,850,000. And that's the bond carrying value. And the bond carrying value means the remainder of the value, or the value of the bond at that time, based on the discount. So the next thing we want to look at is, since the call takes place after 10 years of the 20-year life of the bond, 50%, or $150,000 of the discount remains. So it's not fully amortized or accounted for. And so another way that you can look at this is you take the common stock, which is valued at 5 million, and we know this because we have those 250,000 shares that we just calculated earlier on here. And we multiply that by $20 each, and that gives us 5 million. So then the additional paid in capital they're talking about is 485,000. And when you add that all up together, the common stock value comes up to 9,850,000. All right. So the next problem I want to take a look at deals with leases. So the Martha Corporation can either lease or buy a small garage next to its business that will provide parking for its customers. The company can lease the building for a period of 12 years, which approximates the useful life of the facility and thus qualifies as a capital lease. The terms of the lease are payments of $48,000 per year for the next 12 years. Martha currently is able to borrow money at a long term interest rate of 9%. The company can purchase the building by signing a $320,000 long term mortgage with monthly payments of $4,000. The mortgage also carries an interest rate of 9%. Should they lease it or should they buy it? So, with regard to the lease option, calculate the present value of the lease. The present value of the lease. And let's see if there is. We are going to have to use the present value tables on page 778 in order to help us to calculate which would be better for us to purchase or to lease. Oops. All right. Oops. So we want to calculate first, we want to calculate the present value of the lease. So the parameters of this is that if we lease, it's at 9% and it's for 12 periods, 12 pay periods, which are 12 years. And so we go over here to page 778. And we go to 9% at 12. Oh, wait, this is the wrong present value of a dollar. This is the one. I'm sorry. The present, we're supposed to look on page 780. The present value of a dollar received each period for a given number of periods because it's a periodic payment. So, we're not doing one payment, it's multiple payments. So 9% at 12 periods or 12 years, and that's 7.161. 7.161. And so we use that in our calculations. So for A, we take the periodic payment times the factor, which comes from the tables, and that's going to give us our present value of the lease. So periodic payment is 48,000. So remember we have to pay that every month. And the factor from the table is 7.161. And so that ends up being the present value of that is 343,728. So in other words, if we were to consider all of the payments that we would have to pay every month for the next 12 years, today, if I were to collect all that together, that would be $343,728. So the next question that they ask us, oops, I didn't go far enough, did I? Prepare the journal entry to record the lease agreement. So that would be B. So we would do capital, lease, equipment, and then capital, lease obligations, 343,728, 343,728. So the next thing they want you to do is to record an entry for the depreciation of the building for the first year using straight line. So remember when we're talking about straight line, that's just equally dividing up the depreciation over the life of the asset. In this case, the life of the asset is 12 years. So you take the sidebar calculation, the 343,728, you divide that by 12 years, and that's where you get the 28,644. So for C, we would debit depreciation expense, credit accumulated depreciation, and we would debit 28,644 and credit 28,644. All right. D, what they want us to do in D is to prepare the journal entries to record the lease payment for the next 2 years. All right, so the lease payment for the next 2 years, we're going to debit interest expense, debit capital lease obligations, and we're going to credit cash. Cash is going out to make these payments. All right, so we know that the cash amount that's going out is 48,000. Of that 48,000, we need to we need to determine what portion of the 48,000 goes to interest expense and what portion of it goes to the lease capital obligations. The easiest to do at this time is to calculate the interest expense because we have the data to calculate that. So remember, the lease amount when you talk about the present value is the 343,000 that we calculated, and we're going to multiply that by the 9%, and so that comes up to 30,936. So that's the amount of the 48,000 that goes towards the interest. And that shouldn't surprise anyone. If you buy a car and you're making $600 payments every month, 500 dollars of those payments is probably going to the actual interest. The amount that you're actually paying to pay off the car is probably like $100. And that's why the term comes up when you're buying a car. It says you're upside down in your payments, meaning that you owe more on the car than what it's actually worth. Because most long-term leases or mortgages, the first 10 or the first couple of years, several years, you're paying mostly the interest. You're not even paying the principal down on the mortgage, the lease, or the car payment. So that's when they call it upside down. All right, so the difference between the 30,000 and the 48,000 is $17,064, and that's what's going to be debited to the capital lease obligations. In year two, which I don't have enough room, so I'm going to have to erase this. So in the next year, we're going to still debit interest expense. We're still going to debit capital lease obligations, and we're still going to credit cash. and the cash we know is going to be 48,000. But we want to determine of that which portion goes to the interest on the lease and the actual lease obligation. So remember that we already knew that this amount was 343,728. And remember, we have to subtract out the interest payment, I'm sorry, the obligation that we had from the previous year. And then we want to multiply that by the 9%. So that gives us 29,400. So that is your interest obligation, which means, I'm sorry, your interest expense, which means the rest of it goes towards your lease. And that's usually how it goes. If you look at your car payment, or if you have a house that you're paying a note on, a mortgage on, every time you pay interest for the year, the next year's interest is less than the previous year, because remember, you're paying down the interest on that thing. And so that's why at the beginning you become upside down at a certain point, and it's not until you're almost done paying your car off or your home mortgage off that you see the majority of your payment is now going towards the principal amount of the note, not towards interest. And so that's why you find that there's some companies, they make sure that they get their payment first, which is the interest. They make their money first. Um, all right. So then we go to number 2, and it says, with regard to the purchase option, prepare a monthly payment schedule showing the monthly payment, that the interest for the month, the reduction in your debt, and the unpaid balance. All right, so I'll need some space for this. So this is more of a visual to show you what it would look like typically if maybe even you owed this amount of money. And this is what they call a payment schedule. And with the payment schedule, you get to see how much your payment is, and how a portion of your payment goes to interest and a portion of your payment goes to the principal amount. Then it gives you the new ending balance, and so forth and so on. So we say month, payment, and then we have the interest, reduction in debt, and the unpaid balance. So that's month 1, 2, 3, 4. So remember, we're making payments every month. That's the first month, second month, third month. And the interest is 0.75%. Right? So 0.75% of 4,000 is 2,400. And so the reduction in debt is 1,600. Oh, by the way, that's 320,000. That's at the beginning, 0. Dot, 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 dot. All right. And so then the ending balance now of what still needs to be paid is 318. So we start all over again in the next month. Make that $4,000 payment. And so now your interest payment, oopsie, So now your interest payment is 2388, and that leaves 16. Good grief, 1612 to reduce your debt. That's the amount that's going to your debt, and so the debt that you have left over, still outstanding to be paid another day, is 316,788. And this one's rounded here. It's 16 to 24 and 3, 15, 164. So that's what that looks like. Lastly, they prepare the journal entries to record the purchase in the first two monthly payments. So let's go ahead and show that. So this is based on the purchase. So we purchased the building, and then we have the mortgage payable, 320,000, 320,000. Then in month one, the mortgage expense, the mortgage payable, and then cash. So remember, this is the Splitsville. Remember, we make $4,000 payments every month, and we already showed in the previous chart that when I do that, 2,400 goes towards the expense, and the remainder, 1,600, goes towards the principal amount of the loan. That's the only part that's paying down the loan. So then in month two, mortgage expense, the mortgage payable, and then cash. So it's 2388, 1612, and then the $4,000 payment. All right. Well, that was long, but I hope it was helpful to you.